The smell of garlic and fresh basil filled the air as Maria wiped down table 12 for what felt like the 100th time that day. Her feet ached in her worn-out sneakers, and the black apron tied around her waist had seen better days. Romano's Italian bistro wasn't the fanciest place in town, but it had character. Red checkered tablecloths, dim lighting from vintage pendant lamps, and the constant chatter of families enjoying their Friday night dinners. Maria had been working here for 3 years now, ever since she graduated from community college with a degree that seemed more like a piece of expensive paper these days. Music theory and piano performance, that's what she had studied. Her professors had called her gifted, said she had real potential. But potential doesn't pay rent, and dreams don't put food on the table every night after the last customer left and the kitchen staff finished cleaning up. Maria would find herself drawn to the old upright piano sitting in the corner. It wasn't much to look at. The wood was scratched, a few keys stuck sometimes, and it definitely needed tuning. But when she sat on that worn wooden bench and placed her fingers on those keys, magic happened. She would play everything from classical pieces she learned in college to modern songs she heard on the radio. Chopin, Beethoven, Ed Sheeran, Adele, her fingers knew them all. The notes would echo through the empty restaurant, mixing with the smell of leftover pizza and the soft hum of the refrigerators in the back. Sometimes Tony, the manager, would stick his head out of his office and listen for a few minutes. He never said much, just nodded and went back to counting receipts. The other waitresses knew about her talent too. Lisa, who worked the morning shift, always joked that Maria was wasting her skills serving spaghetti when she could be playing concert halls. Jokes aside, everyone knew the reality. Making it as a musician was tough, and Maria had bills to pay. Her apartment was small, just a studio on the 3rd floor of an old building downtown. The walls were thin, so she couldn't practice at home without disturbing her neighbors. That's why the restaurant piano became her sanctuary. It was the only place she could really play, really express herself through music. The truth was, Maria had come so close to her dream once. During her senior year of college, she had auditioned for one of the most prestigious music schools in the country. The letter came on a Tuesday afternoon. She still remembered it perfectly. Her hands shook as she opened the envelope, and when she saw the word congratulations, she actually screamed with joy. But then she saw the numbers. Tuition, room and board, living expenses, it all added up to more money than her family had ever seen. Her parents worked hard, her dad at the factory and her mom cleaning offices, but there was no way they could afford it. Student loans would have buried her in debt for decades, and even then, there was no guarantee she'd make it as a professional pianist. So she made the practical choice, the safe choice. She turned down the acceptance and took the job at Romano's instead. Some nights, lying in bed staring at the ceiling, she wondered what would have happened if she had taken that leap of faith, but life went on. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and months into years. The routine became familiar. Clock in at 4, serve dinner until closing, count tips, go home, repeat. She got good at remembering orders, learned which customers liked extra cheese and who always asked for the check before dessert. Regular customers started requesting her section, and Tony gave her more shifts. The money wasn't great, but it was steady. She could pay rent, buy groceries, and even save a little each month. Her parents were proud. Their daughter had a job, was responsible, was making her own way in the world. But sometimes Maria caught herself staring at the piano during busy dinner rushes, wondering if she was slowly losing the skill she had worked so hard to develop. She tried to keep up with her practice, but it wasn't the same. 20 minutes here and there after work couldn't compare to the hours she used to spend perfecting difficult pieces. Her fingers felt less sure, her timing not quite as sharp. The fear that her talent was slipping away haunted her more than any nightmare. The other staff members at Romano's had become like family. There was Carlos in the kitchen, who made the best marinara sauce this side of Italy and always saved her a plate of pasta before heading home. Jenny, the hostess, who knew every customer's name and somehow managed to keep smiling even during the busiest nights. And then there was old Mr. Peterson, who came in every Thursday for the early bird special and always asked Maria about her music. Mr. Peterson was different from the other customers. He actually listened when she mentioned her background, asked thoughtful questions about what she was working on. He told her once that his late wife had been a piano teacher, and he could tell Maria had real talent just by the way she carried herself. Those conversations meant more to her than he probably realized. The restaurant industry was tough in ways people didn't understand unless they had lived it. Sore feet, demanding customers, split shifts that made it hard to have a normal social life. Maria's college friends had moved on to office jobs with regular hours and health benefits. They met for drinks sometimes, and she would listen to them complain about their boring desk jobs while secretly envying their stability and weekends off. But Romano's had its moments too. Like when little kids would get excited seeing the piano and ask if anyone could play it, or when couples got engaged at table 7 and the whole restaurant would cheer. Maria had served birthday dinners, anniversary celebrations, first dates, and family reunions. She had become part of people's special moments, even if they didn't know her name. The piano called to her every single day. During slow afternoons, she would find excuses to walk past it, maybe dust it off or straighten the bench. Her fingers itched to play, especially when she heard a beautiful song on the restaurant sound system. She had memorized hundreds of pieces over the years, and they all lived in her head, waiting for the chance to come alive again. Sometimes she wondered if she was being foolish, holding on to a dream that had already passed her by. Maybe it was. Time to accept that she was a waitress now, not a musician. Maybe it was time to stop torturing herself with what could have been and focus on what was. But every time she sat at that old piano after hours, every time her fingers found their way across those familiar keys, she remembered why she had fallen in love with music in the first place. The power to move people, to express emotions that words couldn't capture, to create something beautiful in a world that often felt harsh and unfair. That was what music meant to her. And deep down, she knew that no matter how many plates she carried or how many orders she took, that part of her would always be a musician first. Friday nights at Romano's were always crazy, but this particular evening felt different from the moment Maria walked through the employee entrance. There was electricity in the air, a buzz of excitement that made even the kitchen staff move with extra energy. Tony had been talking about this night for weeks, the monthly open mic night, that he hoped would bring in younger customers and maybe get some good reviews online. The restaurant looked completely different. The usual dim lighting had been replaced with brighter spotlights, and someone had moved tables around to create a small performance area near the front window. But the real showstopper was the grand piano that had been delivered that afternoon. It was nothing like the old, upright Maria was used to. This instrument was gorgeous, with a glossy black finish that reflected the restaurant lights like a mirror. Maria couldn't help but stare at it as she tied her apron and got ready for her shift. The piano seemed to call to her, its keys practically begging to be played. She had never sat at a grand piano before, only seen them in concert halls and fancy hotels. The thought of what it might sound like, how those keys might feel under her fingers, made her heart race a little. The reservations were booked solid. Tony had been promoting the event on social media for weeks, and word had spread around town. There were going to be food bloggers there, real ones with thousands of followers who could make or break a restaurant with a single review. Maria overheard Tony on the phone with his wife earlier, pacing nervously and talking about how this could be the break. Romano's needed to compete with the fancy new places opening downtown. As the afternoon wore on, more details about the evening became clear. A local jazz pianist named David Chun was supposed to be the main entertainment. He had a good reputation, played at several upscale venues around the city, and his music was exactly the sophisticated touch Tony wanted for the restaurant. Everything was planned perfectly. David would play during dinner service, creating an elegant atmosphere that would impress the food critics and social media influencers who were expected to attend. But then, around 3 o'clock, Tony's phone rang. Maria was refilling salt shakers when she heard Tony's voice getting louder and more stressed. She couldn't make out all the words, but she caught enough to understand that something was very wrong. Tony's face went pale, and he started pacing around the dining room, running his hands through his hair the way he did when he was really worried. "What do you mean you can't make it?" Tony was practically shouting into the phone. "This is the biggest night we've had in months. I've got food bloggers coming. The whole neighborhood knows about this event." The pianist was sick. Not just a little under the weather, but genuinely ill and unable to perform. Maria watched as Tony tried to negotiate, offering to send a car, to reschedule, to do anything that might save the evening. But it was no use. David Chen was in bed with the flu and wouldn't be playing anywhere that night. After Tony hung up, the panic really set in. He immediately started making more phone calls, trying to find a replacement on just a few hours' notice. But it was Friday evening, and every decent pianist in the city was either already booked or unavailable. Maria listened to call after call end in disappointment. Each no made Tony's shoulders slump a little more. The first customer started, arriving around 5:30, and Maria could see the excitement on their faces as they spotted the beautiful grand piano. A group of college students from the music program at the local university had come specifically for the performance. An elderly couple mentioned to Maria that they hadn't been out for live music in years and were really looking forward to it. A young man at table 6 kept checking his watch and asking when the pianist would start playing. Meanwhile, Tony was still frantically trying to solve the problem. He called every musician he could think of, reached out to the music school, even posted desperate messages on local Facebook groups. But as the clock ticked closer to 7, when the music was supposed to start, it became clear that he wasn't going to find anyone. Maria felt terrible watching Tony struggle. She had never seen him so stressed. Romano's wasn't just a job. To him, it was his family's legacy. His grandfather had opened the original location decades ago, and Tony had grown up in the restaurant business. This open mic night was supposed to be his chance to prove that the old place could still compete with the trendy new spots in town. The dining room was fuller than Maria had seen it in months. Every table was occupied, and there was even a waiting list for later seatings. Food bloggers sat at prominent tables with their cameras and notebooks ready. The music students had claimed a large table near the piano, their instruments cases stacked nearby. Apparently some of them had planned to perform during the open mic portion of the evening, but without a professional pianist to anchor the event, everything was falling apart. Tony made announcement after announcement, first saying the music would start soon, then that there was a slight delay, then that they were working on resolving a technical issue. Maria could see the confusion and disappointment spreading across customers' faces. Some people started asking for their checks, clearly planning to leave and find entertainment elsewhere. Others seemed irritated, checking their phones and looking around impatiently. The food bloggers were taking notes, but not the kind Tony wanted them to take. This was turning into a disaster, and everyone in the restaurant could feel it. Carlos emerged from the kitchen during a brief lull, wiping his hands on his apron and surveying the crowded dining room. "Boss looks like he's about to have a heart attack," he whispered to Maria as she picked up an order. "This was supposed to be our big night." Jenny, usually so calm and collected at the hostess station, was fielding complaints and trying to manage expectations for the people still waiting to be seated. She kept glancing at Tony with worried eyes, clearly wanting to help but not knowing what to do. The beautiful grand piano sat silent under the spotlights, almost mocking the chaos around it. Every time Maria walked past it, she felt a pang in her chest. She knew that instrument was capable of producing incredible music, could fill the restaurant with melodies that would make people forget their disappointment. But it remained quiet, unused, a symbol of the evening's failures. By 7:30, Tony looked defeated. Maria could see him calculating in his head how much money he had spent on promotion, the cost of renting the piano, the potential lost revenue from customers who were leaving early. His dream of elevating Romano's reputation was crumbling before his eyes, and there seemed to be nothing anyone could do about it. The irony wasn't lost on Maria. Here she was, surrounded by disappointed music lovers, watching a beautiful piano go silent while she carried plates and refilled water glasses. 3 years of hiding her talent, 3 years of playing that old upright after hours when no one was listening. And now when live music was desperately needed, she remained invisible behind her waitress uniform. Something was building inside her, a feeling she couldn't quite name. It was part frustration, part sadness, and part something else, something that felt dangerously like hope. Maria's hands were shaking as she carried a tray of appetizers to table 9. She tried to focus on her job, on the familiar routine of taking orders and serving food, but her eyes kept drifting back to that grand piano. It sat there like a beautiful, silent giant waiting for someone to bring it to life. And with each passing minute, more customers were getting restless. She overheard a conversation at table 3 that made her stomach twist. 2 food bloggers were discussing whether they should leave and write about the disappointing experience. "I mean, the food is decent," one of them said, "but we came here specifically for the live music. This is exactly the kind of thing that shows a restaurant isn't ready for the big leagues." Those words hit Maria harder than they should have. She had watched Tony pour his heart into this place for years. She had seen him stay late counting receipts, worry about paying suppliers, and dream about making Romano something special. This wasn't just a business failure happening in front of her eyes. It was watching someone's dreams crumble. At 8 o'clock, Tony finally made the announcement everyone had been dreading. He walked to the front of the restaurant, his usual confident posture replaced by the slumped shoulders of defeat. The conversations in the dining room gradually died down as people realized he was about to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen," Tony began, his voice lacking its usual warmth, "I'm afraid I have some disappointing news. Our pianist for this evening has fallen ill and won't be able to perform. We've tried everything to find a replacement, but unfortunately, we haven't been successful." A wave of disappointed murmurs swept through the restaurant. Maria watched from near the kitchen as customers shook their heads, some reaching for their purses and wallets. The music students at the large table looked particularly let down. They had clearly been excited about the evening. "However," Tony continued, trying to salvage what he could, "we'd still love for you to enjoy our food and the atmosphere. All appetizers will be half price this evening, and we hope you'll give us another chance when we reschedule our next music night." It was a nice gesture, but Maria could see it wasn't enough. People were already standing up, putting on their coats and heading for the door. The elderly couple who had mentioned not being out for live music in years looked especially disappointed. As they slowly gathered their things, that's when something inside Maria snapped. Not in an angry way, but more like a dam finally giving way to water that had been building up for years. She watched Tony's face, saw the defeat in his eyes, and felt all those nights of playing alone after closing time rush back to her. All those dreams she had pushed aside, all that music she had kept locked inside herself. What was the point of having talent if she never used it when it mattered? Before she could talk herself out of it, Maria set down her tray and walked toward Tony. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears, and her palms were sweaty, but her feet kept moving. This was either the bravest or the stupidest thing she had ever done, and she was about to find out which. "Tony," she said quietly, touching his arm as he started to walk back toward his office. "Wait." He turned around and she could see the stress written all over his face. "What's up, Maria? Look, I know this is a mess. I'll try to make sure everyone's shifts don't get cut because of this disaster." "That's not what I wanted to talk about," Maria said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can play." Tony stared at her for a moment, clearly not understanding. "What do you mean?" "The piano," Maria said, nodding toward the grand piano that still sat under the spotlight. "I can play it? I went to school for music?" "I know you've heard me practicing on the old upright sometimes." For a few seconds, Tony just looked at her like she had spoken in a foreign language. Then understanding dawned on his face, followed quickly by a mixture of hope and doubt. "Maria, that's really sweet of you to offer, but this isn't the same as playing around after hours. There are food critics out there, people with cameras, music students who actually know what they're listening to." "I know," Maria said, and she was surprised by how steady her voice sounded now. "But what do you have to lose? People are already leaving. At least if I try, maybe some of them will stay. Tony glanced around the dining room, where more customers were gathering their belongings and heading for the exit. The food bloggers were packing up their cameras, clearly ready to write off the evening as a complete failure. He looked back at Maria as she could see him weighing his options. "Are you sure about this?" he asked. "I mean, really sure? Because if it doesn't go well, then I'll go back to serving tables and we'll pretend it never happened," Maria finished for him. "But Tony, I've been playing piano for 15 years. I know I can do this." The truth was, she wasn't as confident as she sounded. Playing alone in an empty restaurant was completely different from performing in front of a crowd. She had never played a grand piano before, didn't know how it would feel or sound. And the thought of all those eyes watching her, judging her, made her feel slightly sick, but there was something else, something stronger than the fear. It was the memory of every time she had sat at that old upright piano and felt truly alive. It was the thought of all those years of lessons and practice and dreaming that would mean nothing if she didn't take this chance. It was the image of Tony's defeated face and the knowledge that she might be able to help him save this night. "Okay," Tony said finally, though he still looked uncertain. "Okay, let's try it. But Maria, you don't have to do this. I don't want you to feel pressured." "I want to," Maria said, and as the words came out, she realized they were completely true. Despite her nerves, despite her fear of failure, she wanted this more than she had wanted anything in a long time. Tony walked back to the front of the restaurant, and once again the conversations died down as people prepared to hear what he had to say. Maria stayed where she was, her heart racing as she watched him clear his throat. "Folks, before you leave, I have one more announcement," Tony said, his voice carrying a note of hope that hadn't been there before. "We do have someone who can play piano this evening. One of our own staff members has graciously offered to perform for you." The murmur that went through the restaurant this time was different, curious rather than disappointed. Maria saw people sitting back down, others pausing in, putting on their coats. The food bloggers looked up from packing their equipment, clearly intrigued by this unexpected development. "So, if you'll give us just a moment," Tony continued, "Maria will be right with you." And that's when it hit her. She was really going to do this. In about 2 minutes, she was going to sit at that beautiful grand piano in front of all these people and play. There was no backing out now, no changing her mind. She had volunteered, Tony had announced it, and everyone was waiting, Maria untied. Her apron with trembling fingers, smoothing down her black pants and white blouse. It wasn't exactly concert attire, but it would have to do. She took a deep breath, said a quick prayer to whatever higher power might be listening, and started walking toward the piano. The dining room had gone completely quiet now. Every conversation had stopped, every fork had been set down, every eye was on her. It was the most terrifying and exhilarating moment of her life. The walk from the kitchen to the piano felt like it took forever. Each step echoed in Maria's mind as she moved through the silent restaurant. 50 pairs of eyes followed her every movement, and she could feel the weight of their expectations pressing down on her shoulders. Some faces showed curiosity, others skepticism, and a few looked genuinely interested to see what would happen next. As she got closer to the grand piano, Maria's breath caught in her throat. It was even more beautiful up close than she had imagined. The black lacquer finish was so perfect she could see her reflection in it, and the keys seemed to glow under the spotlight. This wasn't like the old, beaten-up upright she was used to. This was a real concert piano, the kind she had only dreamed of playing. Her hands were shaking as she reached out to touch the fallboard. The wood was smooth and cool under her fingertips, and when she lifted it to reveal the keys, they were pristine white and black perfection. She had to take a moment just to steady herself, to remember how to breathe normally. The piano bench was positioned perfectly, and when Maria sat down, she was surprised by how comfortable it felt. It was like the instrument had been waiting for her. She adjusted the bench height slightly, her fingers finding their natural position over the keys. The silence in the restaurant was so complete she could hear her own heartbeat. Now came the hardest part, choosing what to play. She had hundreds of pieces memorized, from classical masterworks to modern songs, but which one would be right for this moment? Something too simple might disappoint the music students in the audience, but something too complex might alienate the regular customers who just wanted to enjoy their dinner. Then she remembered a piece that had always been special to her. Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor. It was the first advanced piece she had ever mastered, the one that had convinced her professors she had real talent. It was challenging enough to showcase her abilities, but beautiful enough that anyone could appreciate it. Even if they didn't know anything about classical music, Maria placed her fingers gently on the keys, feeling the familiar weight and resistance. Grand piano keys felt different from upright piano keys, more responsive, more alive somehow. She closed her eyes for just a moment, centering herself the way her college professor had taught her. "The music already exists," he used to say. "Your job is just to let it out." The first note rang out clear and pure, filling the restaurant with a sound that seemed to come from heaven itself. Maria had never heard anything so beautiful come from her own playing. The grand piano's tone was rich and complex, with layers of sound that the old upright could never produce. That first note gave her confidence, and she let her training take over. The opening melody of the ballade began softly, almost hesitantly, like someone telling the beginning of a story they weren't sure anyone wanted to hear. Maria's fingers moved across the keys with growing confidence, each note perfectly placed, perfectly timed. The sound filled every corner of the restaurant, and she could feel the audience's attention shift from skeptical curiosity to genuine interest. As the piece developed, Maria lost herself in the music. The restaurant around her seemed to fade away, and there was only her, the piano, and Chopin's incredible composition. Her fingers knew exactly where to go, muscle memory taking over from years of practice. The melody soared and dipped, powerful one moment and delicate the next, telling its wordless story through pure sound. She could feel the audience responding, even with her eyes focused on the keys. The quality of the silence had changed. It wasn't the uncomfortable quiet of disappointment anymore, but the breathless hush of people genuinely captivated by what they were hearing. Someone had been coughing earlier, but that had stopped completely. Even the sounds from the kitchen had quieted, as if the entire world was holding its breath. The middle section of the ballade was more challenging, with rapid passages that required precise fingerwork and careful balance between the melody and accompaniment. Maria's hands moved independently, her left hand providing the steady bass line while her right hand danced through the complex melodic patterns. She had practiced this section thousands of times, but it had never felt so effortless, so natural. As she played, Maria began to notice things about the grand piano that amazed her. When she played softly, the sound was like silk, smooth and warm and intimate. When the music called for power, the piano responded with a richness and depth that filled the entire space without being harsh or overwhelming. The dynamic range was incredible. She could whisper or shout musically, and the instrument followed her every intention perfectly. The piece built toward its dramatic climax, and Maria could feel her own emotions pouring into the music. All those years of playing alone, all those dreams she had pushed aside, all that passion she had kept hidden, it was all coming out through her fingertips. She wasn't just playing notes on a page anymore. She was sharing her soul with everyone in that room. The technical demands of the climax were intense, with both hands flying across the keyboard in intricate patterns that would have been impossible on a lesser instrument. But the grand piano handled everything she threw at it, responding to her touch like it was reading her mind. Fast passages sparkled with clarity, and the powerful chords rang out with authority that made the air itself seem to vibrate from the corner of her eye. Maria caught glimpses of the audience's reactions. The music students were leaning forward, their faces showing the recognition of someone who understood exactly how difficult what she was doing really was. The food bloggers had pulled out their phones and were recording, but not in the casual way people usually filmed things. They were capturing this with the intensity of people who knew they were witnessing something special. An elderly man at table 4 had tears in his eyes. A young couple near the window was holding hands, completely mesmerized. Even Carlos had emerged from the kitchen and was standing in the doorway, his chef's hat still on, watching with amazement. The final section of the ballade was approaching, and Maria could feel the emotional weight of the piece building to its inevitable conclusion. This was where Chopin showed his genius, taking all the themes that had been introduced earlier and weaving them together into something heartbreaking and beautiful. The melody that had started so hesitantly now returned with full confidence, supported by rich harmonies that seemed to contain all the joy and sorrow in the world. Her fingers moved with precision and grace, each note perfectly controlled yet emotionally charged. The piano responded to every subtle change in her touch, every slight variation in timing that gave the music its human quality. This wasn't just technical perfection. This was music making at its highest level, communication, through sound that went deeper than words ever could. As the piece neared its end, Maria could feel the entire restaurant holding its breath. The final phrases of the ballade were like saying goodbye to someone you loved, beautiful and sad and inevitable all at once. She played them with all the tenderness she could summon, letting each note ring out fully before moving to the next. And then, with a final, gentle chord that seemed to hang in the air forever, it was over. Maria's hands remained on the keys for a moment, not quite ready to break the spell that had fallen over the room. The last note faded slowly, gradually giving way to the most complete silence she had ever experienced. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Maria sat frozen at the piano bench, her hands still resting on the keys, afraid to move and break whatever magic had just happened. The entire restaurant seemed suspended in time, as if everyone was processing what they had just witnessed. She could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears, and for a terrifying moment she wondered if she had made some terrible mistake. Then, from somewhere in the back of the restaurant came the sound of slow, deliberate clapping. It was the elderly man from table 4, the one she had seen with tears in his eyes during her performance. His applause was measured and respectful, the kind of clapping you might hear at a symphony hall. One by one, other people began to join in, and within seconds, the entire restaurant erupted in thunderous applause. But this wasn't just polite restaurant clapping. People were on their feet, their faces filled with genuine amazement and joy. The music students were applauding with the enthusiasm of people who truly understood what they had just heard. The food bloggers were clapping while still holding their phones, having recorded every moment. Even the kitchen staff had come out to join the standing ovation, their work temporarily forgotten. Maria slowly turned around on the piano bench, finally allowing herself to see the full impact of what she had done. The sight took her breath away. Every single person in the restaurant was standing, their faces beaming with appreciation and wonder. Some people were wiping away tears, others were shaking their heads in disbelief, and a few were actually cheering like they were at a rock concert. Tony was standing near the hostess station, and when their eyes met, Maria saw something she had never seen before. He wasn't just proud, he looked amazed, like he was seeing her for the first time. His mouth was slightly open, and he kept shaking his head as if he couldn't quite believe what had just happened in his restaurant. The applause seemed to go on forever, washing over Maria like a warm wave. She stood up slowly, not sure what the proper response should be. She had never received a standing ovation before, had never performed for anyone except her professors and a few fellow students during college recitals. This felt surreal, like something that happened to other people, real musicians, not waitresses who played piano after hours. When the applause finally began to die down, people didn't immediately sit back down. Instead, they seemed reluctant to let the moment end. The elderly gentleman who had started the clapping made his way over to the piano, his wife following close behind. His eyes were still misty, and when he reached Maria, he took her hands. In his, "My dear," he said, his voice shaky with emotion, "that was the most beautiful thing I've heard in 20 years. My late wife used to play Chopin, and you made me feel like she was in the room again." Maria felt her own eyes filling with tears. "Thank you," she managed to say. "That means more to me than you know." Other people began approaching the piano, wanting to congratulate her and share their reactions. A young woman from the university music program introduced herself as a piano student and said she had never heard that piece played with such feeling. One of the food bloggers asked if he could interview her, explaining that he wanted to write about what had just happened because it was unlike anything he had experienced in his 10 years of reviewing restaurants, but perhaps the most meaningful. Reaction came from Carlos, who had worked his way through the crowd to reach her. The tough, no-nonsense cook who rarely showed emotion had tears streaming down his face. "Maria," he said in his heavily accented English, "I had no idea. All this time, we had no idea." As the excitement gradually settled and people returned to their tables, something remarkable happened. Nobody wanted to leave. The customers who had been putting on their coats and heading for the door were now settling back in, ordering dessert and coffee, clearly hoping Maria might play something else. The atmosphere in the restaurant had completely transformed from disappointment and frustration to joy and celebration. Tony approached the piano, still looking dazed. "Maria," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology. I've been watching you work here for 3 years, and I had no idea you were capable of that." "It's okay," Maria replied. "I never told anyone. I wasn't sure myself if I could still do it." "Well, you can," Tony said with a laugh. "My phone has been buzzing non-stop since you finished playing. People are already posting videos on social media, and the comments are incredible. I think you might have just saved Romano's." Indeed, several customers had recorded Maria's performance on their phones, and within hours, those videos would be shared thousands of times. The hashtag Waitress pianist would start trending locally, and by the next morning, news stations would be calling the restaurant asking for interviews. As the evening continued, Maria found herself in an almost dreamlike state. She returned to serving tables, but everything felt different now. Customers who had witnessed her performance treated her like a celebrity, asking for selfies and requesting her to play more songs. She obliged with a few shorter pieces throughout the evening. Each one met with enthusiastic applause. The food bloggers ended up staying until closing time, not just reviewing the food, but writing about the entire experience. One of them would later publish an article titled "Hidden Talent in Plain Sight: When Your Waitress Turns Out to Be a Concert Pianist," which would be shared across multiple social media platforms and read by thousands of people. More importantly, for Maria's future, several people in the audience that night would prove to be important connections. The elderly gentleman turned out to be a retired music professor from the state university, and he promised to make some phone calls on her behalf. One of the music students mentioned that her teacher was always looking for talented pianists to perform at the university's concert series. Even some of the regular customers said they knew people in the local arts community who would be interested in hearing Maria play, but perhaps the most significant moment came near the end of the evening when a well-dressed woman approached Maria during a quiet moment. She introduced herself as the director of a local performing arts center and explained that they were always looking for talented musicians for their community concert series. "Would you be interested in performing a solo recital?" she asked. "We could start small, maybe a Sunday afternoon concert, but if it goes well, there could be opportunities for bigger performances." Maria felt her heart skip a beat. A real concert in a real venue, with people coming specifically to hear her play, it was everything she had dreamed about during those late-night practice sessions on the old upright piano. Over the following weeks, Maria's life would change in ways she never could have imagined. The video of her performance went viral, garnering millions of views and comments from around the world. Music schools that had been out of reach financially suddenly became interested in offering her scholarships. Record labels reached out wanting to discuss possible recording contracts, but even more important than the professional opportunities was the personal transformation. For the first time in years, Maria felt like she was living authentically, using her talents instead of hiding them. Tony arranged for her to perform regularly at Romano's, turning their monthly open mic night into a weekly event that drew crowds from across the city. 6 months later, Maria would release her first album, recorded partly at Romano's on the same grand piano where she had made her breakthrough performance. She dedicated it to everyone who had ever felt like their dreams were too big or too impractical to pursue. The title track was her own arrangement of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, the piece that had changed her life forever, and sometimes on quiet Sunday afternoons when the restaurant was slow, she would still sit at that old upright piano, in the corner, playing softly and remembering the night when everything changed. The night when a waitress decided to trust her talent and in doing so, discovered that dreams deferred are not always dreams denied.